If I told you there's a bird that can recognize individual human faces and remember them for at least 5 years, craft sophisticated tools from materials it's never encountered before, hold grudges that last across generations, and even understand the concept of water displacement, something that took humans millennia to formalize in physics, you might think I'm describing some fantastical creature from science fiction, but I'm talking about crows. These glossy black birds that you see in parking lots, on telephone wires, and rummaging through trash bins are hiding one of nature's most extraordinary minds behind those dark, intelligent eyes. Crows belong to the family Corvidae, which also includes ravens, magpies, and jays. There are about 40 species of crows distributed across every continent except Antarctica and South America. But what makes crows truly remarkable isn't their global distribution, it's their brains. Recent scientific research has revealed that crows possess cognitive abilities that force us to completely reconsider what we thought we knew about animal intelligence. Their performance on complex cognitive tasks rivals that of great apes, despite having brains that are a fraction of the size. For centuries, humans have noticed something special about crows. They appear in mythology and folklore across cultures, often portrayed as tricksters, messengers, or harbingers. But the reality of crow intelligence is far more fascinating than any myth. So let's dive deep into the world of crows and discover why these birds are among the most remarkable creatures on our planet. Let's start with the crow's brain, because that's where the magic happens. A crow's brain contains approximately 1.5 billion neurons, as many as some monkey species. Now, you might be thinking that's not particularly impressive for a brain, but here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about the total number of neurons, it's about how they're packed and organized. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences revealed something remarkable. Bird brains pack neurons far more densely than mammalian brains. In fact, the brains of corvids and parrots contain on average twice as many neurons as primate brains of the same mass. This means that despite their walnut-sized brains, large corvids like crows have forebrain neuron counts equal to or greater than primates with much larger brains. If you compared a crow's brain to an orangutan brain of the same mass, the crow's brain would have approximately 43 times more neurons. What makes this even more remarkable is how bird brains achieve this feat. For decades, scientists assumed that because bird brains lacked the layered cortex that mammals have, they couldn't achieve the same cognitive sophistication. They were wrong. Bird brains achieve similar results through a completely different architecture. The avian pallium, the bird equivalent of the mammalian cortex, has a smooth surface that allows for more efficient neuron packing. Their neurons are packed at densities of 100,000 to 200,000 neurons per milligram in most brain regions, compared to much lower densities in similarly sized mammals. Crows have an encephalization quotient, a measure of brain size relative to body size, of about 4.1, which is remarkably close to chimpanzees at 4.2. For reference, humans score 8.1. But the encephalization quotient doesn't tell the whole story. What's particularly significant is the nidopallium caudolateral in the crow brain, which is functionally similar to the mammalian prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for complex planning, decision-making, and social behavior. When researchers tracked the activity of hundreds of neurons in crow brains while the birds performed complex cognitive tasks, they found this region lighting up with activity, demonstrating sophisticated problem-solving in real time. Now let's talk about crow eyes, which are engineering marvels in their own right. Like most birds, crows have eyes that are enormous relative to their skull size. If human eyes were proportionally as large, they'd be the size of baseballs. These eyes give crows exceptional vision. They can see into the ultraviolet spectrum, which means they perceive colors and patterns in the world that are completely invisible to us. When a crow looks at another crow, it sees iridescent patterns in the feathers that we simply cannot detect. This UV vision also helps them find food. Many insects and berries reflect UV light in ways that make them stand out against their background. Crow eyes are positioned on the sides of their heads, giving them nearly 360-degree vision. This makes them extremely difficult to sneak up on. But unlike most birds with side-facing eyes, crows can also achieve binocular vision by looking slightly downward. This gives them depth perception when they need it, particularly when manipulating objects with their beaks. They quite literally see the world from multiple perspectives. The crow's beak deserves its own discussion. It's not just a tool, it's a Swiss Army knife. The beak is strong enough to crack nuts and tear meat, but also precise enough to preen individual feathers and probe tiny crevices for insects. The tip of a crow's beak contains numerous sensory receptors that allow them to feel what they are touching, almost like fingertips. Crows use their beaks to test the weight and texture of objects, assess whether food is fresh or spoiled, and even as a measuring tool. Crow feathers are more sophisticated than they appear. That black coloration isn't just for show. It's created by microscopic structures in the feathers that absorb almost all wavelengths of light. This has practical benefits. The melanin that creates the dark color also makes the feathers more resistant to wear and bacterial degradation. Black feathers literally last longer and stay stronger than lighter-colored feathers. The slight iridescence you see on a crow's feathers in sunlight, those hints of blue, purple, and green, comes from the microscopic structure of the feathers themselves, not from pigments. Crows also have specialized feathers called rictal bristles around their beaks. These look like stiff whiskers and serve multiple functions. They protect the eyes while the crow is probing for food. They may help funnel insects toward the beak, and they contain sensory cells that detect vibrations and air movements. The crow's feet are surprisingly dexterous. While they don't have opposable thumbs like primates, crows can grasp and manipulate objects with considerable skill. They have 4 toes, 3 pointing forward and 1 back, and can exert significant gripping force. Crows have learned to use their feet as hands to hold food while tearing it apart with their beak, or to secure an object while working on it. Here's where crows truly separate themselves from most of the animal kingdom. Let's start with tool use, because this is where crows consistently astound researchers. Tool use was once considered the defining characteristic of humans. Then we discovered that chimpanzees do it too. But crows don't just use tools. They manufacture them with a sophistication that rivals primates. The New Caledonian crow, native to the islands of New Caledonia in the South Pacific, is the master craftsman of the crow world. These crows fashion tools from sticks, leaves, and other materials to extract insects from crevices. But they don't just pick up any stick. They carefully select materials, then modify them to create hooks, barbs, and probes. They'll strip leaves from twigs, trim them to the right length, and even create hooks at the end to fish out grubs from holes in trees. Different populations of New Caledonian crows make distinctly different tool designs, and young crows learn these local traditions from their elders. This is genuine culture, the transmission of learned behaviors across generations. In 2002, a New Caledonian crow named Betty captured the scientific world's attention. Researchers at Oxford University presented Betty and another crow named Abel with a small bucket of meat at the bottom of a transparent tube, along with 2 pieces of wire, one hooked and one straight. When Abel flew off with the hooked wire, Betty took the straight wire, wedged one end under a piece of tape, and pulled the other end with her beak, creating a hook. She then used this improvised tool to retrieve the bucket. Out of 10 successful retrievals in subsequent trials, Betty bent the wire into a hook 9 times. This was the first time any animal had been seen making a new tool for a specific task without an extended period of trial and error learning. It seemed Betty understood that she needed a hook to get the bucket and figured out how to make one from a novel material. However, subsequent field research revealed an interesting twist. Scientists discovered that tool bending is actually part of the New Caledonian crow's natural behavioral repertoire. Wild crows bend the shafts of their hooked stick tools during manufacture using various techniques. This doesn't diminish Betty's achievement. She still applied her species' natural abilities to a completely novel material and problem. But it shows how natural behaviors can be flexibly adapted to new situations. More recently, in 2019, researchers demonstrated that New Caledonian crows can plan 3 behavioral steps into the future when using tools. In experiments, crows had to use a short stick to obtain a stone from a tube, then use that stone to release a platform to get meat, all while ignoring distractor tubes. The crows successfully completed these multi-step sequences, demonstrating planning abilities comparable to those used in playing chess. Crows can also solve multi-step puzzles that require understanding cause and effect. Researchers have tested crows using experiments inspired by Aesop's fable, The Crow and the Pitcher, where a thirsty crow drops stones into a pitcher to raise the water level. In laboratory versions of this test, New Caledonian crows were presented with tubes of water containing floating food rewards just out of reach, along with piles of stones. The results were remarkable. Crows preferentially dropped stones into water-filled tubes instead of sand-filled tubes, demonstrating they understood that only water displacement would work. They chose sinking objects over floating ones, solid objects over hollow ones, and tubes with higher water levels over those with lower levels. In all these tests, the crows demonstrated an understanding of physical causality that researchers compared to that of 5 to 7-year-old human children. However, when presented with counterintuitive tasks, like U-shaped tubes where the water was connected in non-obvious ways, the crows struggled, suggesting limits to their causal reasoning abilities. What's truly fascinating is that researchers who have studied the performance of corvids on these water displacement tasks found evidence of both causal understanding and trial-and-error learning working together. The crows weren't just blindly learning through repetition, they were using intuitive physics combined with learning from experience. Here's where things get even more impressive, and perhaps a little unsettling if you've ever wronged a crow. Crows can recognize and remember individual human faces for years, and they hold remarkably specific memories about whether those individuals were threatening or helpful. In a famous series of experiments conducted at the University of Washington, researchers wore distinctive masks while trapping and banding wild American crows. One mask, dubbed the dangerous mask, was worn during capture, while a different, neutral mask was worn by people who simply walked through the area without bothering the birds. After the trapping events, researchers and volunteers wearing these masks walked through the crows' territories, while observers recorded the birds' responses. The results were striking. Crows consistently scolded and mobbed people wearing the dangerous mask, even when those people were of different ages, genders, and body types than the original trapper. They even recognized the mask when it was held upside down. The crows would tilt their heads sideways to get a better look, then resume their alarm calls. The neutral mask, meanwhile, was mostly ignored. This facial recognition continued for at least 5 years after the original capture events, and in some study sites, has now persisted for over 7 years. Even more remarkable, the percentage of birds scolding the dangerous mask roughly doubled over time, even though most of the scolding crows had never been captured themselves and likely hadn't witnessed the original trapping. Young birds hatched years after the initial capture would join the mobbing behavior. This demonstrates both social learning, crows teaching other crows, which humans are dangerous, and cultural transmission of information across generations. Brain imaging studies using PET scans revealed how crows process these memories. When shown the face of a person who had previously captured them, crows showed activation in brain regions including the nidopallium, mesopallium lateral striatum, and amygdala regions. Areas analogous to those used by mammals including humans for facial recognition and fear conditioning. When exposed to a caring face, someone who had fed them, different patterns of activation appeared. The neural circuitry crows use for recognizing and responding to individual humans is remarkably similar to the system mammals use. This ability to remember faces isn't just a laboratory curiosity. It's a crucial survival skill, particularly in urban environments where crows frequently interact with people. Knowing who to avoid and who might offer food is valuable information. There's even anecdotal evidence that crows remember kind humans and will bring them gifts, shiny objects, buttons, or other treasures they've collected. Crows are highly social birds with complex social structures. American crows are socially monogamous cooperative breeders, forming large family groups of up to 15 individuals from several breeding seasons, that remain together for many years. Offspring from previous nesting seasons typically remain with the family to assist in rearing new nestlings for 4 to 5 years before leaving to establish their own territories. This extended family structure provides young crows with a prolonged period of learning. And here's a fascinating detail about crow brain development. The time spent in the nest as a baby directly correlates with neuron development. Larger species of birds like crows and parrots spend longer periods in the nest compared to smaller birds. A sparrow spends about half as much time in the nest as a crow. This extended developmental period allows more time for the brain to grow and accumulate neurons, which may partially explain why crows and their relatives are so intelligent. Crows have a sophisticated communication system with more than 20 distinct vocalizations. Their most recognizable sound is the familiar caw, but this is just one small part of their vocal repertoire. They use different calls to signal different types of threats, to maintain contact with family members, and to coordinate group activities. Some researchers believe crows may even have regional dialects. One of the most intriguing crow behaviors is what researchers call crow funerals. When a crow dies, other crows often gather around the body, making loud alarm calls and engaging in what looks like a ritual. For years, people interpreted this as evidence of crows mourning their dead. The truth is simultaneously more pragmatic and more impressive. Research by Kaylee Swift at the University of Washington revealed that these gatherings serve a critical function. They're learning experiences. When crows encounter a dead crow, they're trying to understand what killed it so they can avoid the same fate. Swift's experiments showed that crows remember the location where they encountered a dead crow and avoid that spot for weeks afterward. They also remember any people who were near the dead crow, treating them as potential threats. This behavior typically lasts 15 to 20 minutes and involves crows from the surrounding area gathering to assess the danger. This isn't grief in the human sense. It's sophisticated threat assessment and social learning. The crows are essentially conducting an investigation, gathering information that could save their lives, and then sharing that information with others in their social network. Crows are omnivores with remarkably diverse diets. They eat insects, spiders, earthworms, snails, small mammals, eggs, nestlings of other birds, carrion, grains, nuts, seeds, and fruits. In urban environments, they've become adept at exploiting human food sources, including garbage, pet food, and discarded fast food. But crows don't just eat. They demonstrate remarkable foraging strategies that border on ingenious. In Japan, urban crows have learned to place hard-shelled nuts on roads. At pedestrian crossings, wait for cars to run over and crack them, then retrieve the meat when the traffic light turns red, and it's safe to do so. They've learned to use the infrastructure of human cities as a nutcracker. Crows cache food for later consumption, showing impressive spatial memory. They can remember the locations of dozens or even hundreds of cached food items, including what type of food they hid, where and how long ago they hid it. This requires episodic-like memory, the ability to remember not just what and where, but also when. Studies have shown that crows even engage in tactical deception around their caches. If a crow suspects another crow is watching while it hides food, it will create false caches or wait until the observer leaves before hiding food in its real cache location. This suggests crows understand that other crows have knowledge and intentions, a capacity called theory of mind that was once thought to be uniquely human. American crows have shown they can discriminate between different quantities of food and will choose larger amounts over smaller ones. More impressively, they can make these judgments even when the differences are subtle, and when one option is presented in a way that might appear larger, but actually contains less food. American crows don't reach sexual maturity until at least 2 years of age, though most don't leave the nest to breed until they're 4 to 5 years old. This delayed breeding is connected to their extended family social structure. Young crows stay with their parents and help raise subsequent broods of siblings, gaining valuable parenting experience before attempting to breed themselves. The nesting season starts early, with some birds incubating eggs by early April in North America. Crows build bulky stick nests, nearly always in trees but occasionally in large bushes. They favor oak trees but will nest in various tree species. Nests are often placed high up, both for protection from predators and for a good vantage point. The female typically lays 3 to 6 eggs, which she incubates for approximately 18 days. Both parents and helper offspring participate in feeding the young. The nestlings are altricial, hatched naked, blind, and completely dependent on their parents. They grow rapidly, covered in gray down before developing their characteristic black feathers. Young crows usually fledge about 36 days after hatching, but they remain dependent on adults for food for another month after leaving the nest. In the wild, American crows typically live 7 to 8 years on average, though this figure is heavily influenced by high mortality in the first year of life. Many crows die from predation, disease, vehicle strikes, and other hazards before reaching adulthood. However, crows that survive their first year can live considerably longer. The oldest recorded wild American crow lived to be at least 17 years and 5 months old, documented by banding records in Washington state. In captivity, where they're protected from predators, disease, and environmental hazards, crows can live dramatically longer. The oldest well-documented captive American crow lived to be 30 years old. There's even an anecdotal account of a crow named Tata, who allegedly lived to 59 years in New York, though this record remains unverified by ornithologists. Most experts agree that crows have the genetic potential for exceptional longevity, particularly in protected environments. Carrion crows have been documented living 29 years in captivity, with the oldest individuals showing signs of mental deterioration at the end of their lives. Suggesting this represents a true biological maximum for the species. The American crow faces one particularly devastating threat: West Nile virus. American crows are highly susceptible to the North American strain of this virus and typically die within 1 week of infection. Very few survive exposure. This disease caused a dramatic decline in crow populations, with estimates suggesting the American crow population decreased by approximately 45% between 1999 and 2005 due to West Nile virus. However, populations have since begun to recover, demonstrating the species' remarkable resilience. While we've focused primarily on the American crow, the genus Corvus contains approximately 40 species distributed worldwide. Each has evolved unique adaptations to its environment. The American crow inhabits most of North America, from coast to coast, and is absent only from the Arctic tundra. They thrive in diverse habitats including forests, agricultural areas, and increasingly, urban environments. Their adaptability to human-modified landscapes has made them one of the most successful bird species in North America. The carrion crow, common across Europe and parts of Asia, occupies a similar ecological niche to the American crow. These birds are equally intelligent and adaptable. Carrion crows defend breeding territories of 200 to 500 square meters during the breeding season, while non-breeding birds form flocks that roam in search of resources. The hooded crow, closely related to the carrion crow and often considered a subspecies or color morph, displays distinctive gray and black plumage. Research on corvid brain structure has included hooded crows and found they possess exceptionally high numbers of neurons in their pallial brain regions, approximately equal to carrion crows and rooks, despite their smaller overall brain size. The New Caledonian crow, which we've discussed extensively for its remarkable tool-making abilities, is found only on the islands of New Caledonia in the South Pacific. This species eats a wide range of food, including many types of invertebrates, eggs, nestlings, small mammals, snails, nuts, and seeds. They're particularly adept at catching insects, sometimes even capturing night-flying insects at dusk. Their tool use allows them to occupy an ecological niche similar to woodpeckers, which are absent from New Caledonia. Fish crows, found along the southeastern coast of North America and along major rivers, are smaller than American crows and have evolved to exploit aquatic food sources. They can be difficult to distinguish from American crows by sight, but their calls are distinctly different, more nasal and higher pitched. 2 crow species are currently listed as endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service: the Hawaiian crow, or alala, which is extinct in the wild but survives in captivity through conservation breeding programs, and the Mariana crow of Guam and Rota, which faces severe population declines due to habitat loss and introduced predators. Let's explore some of the most fascinating and surprising facts about crows and dispel some common myths. First, the myth: no, crows cannot live for 500 years. This persistent legend has no basis in reality. As we've discussed, even exceptionally long-lived captive crows rarely exceed 30 years, with the unverified maximum being 59 years. The myth likely arose from crows' impressive intelligence and the observation that crow populations persist in the same areas for generations, leading people to incorrectly assume they were seeing the same individual birds. Here's an amazing fact: crows can mimic human speech. While not as accomplished as parrots, crows kept in captivity have learned to reproduce words and phrases. This ability likely stems from their complex vocalization capabilities and the same brain structures that allow them to produce their diverse array of natural calls. Crows engage in play behavior, which is typically considered a sign of intelligence and behavioral flexibility. Young crows have been observed sliding down snow-covered roofs repeatedly, seemingly for no purpose other than enjoyment. They'll also play with objects, tossing sticks in the air and catching them, or dropping and catching objects while flying. Play behavior in animals is thought to help develop motor skills and cognitive abilities needed for survival. Here's something that surprised researchers. Crows can understand the concept of zero. In experiments testing numerical cognition, crows demonstrated the ability to distinguish between different quantities, including recognizing the absence of items as a distinct category, essentially understanding zero as a number. This is a sophisticated mathematical concept that human children don't typically grasp until around age 4 or 5. Crows exhibit what scientists call metacognition. They know what they know. In groundbreaking research published in 2020, scientists trained crows to report whether or not they had seen a faint flash of light. The researchers varied the rule, telling the birds which color to peck only after the flash. This required the crows to monitor their own perceptions, to examine the contents of their own minds, and report what they had experienced. Neural recordings showed that when crows reported seeing the light, specific sensory neurons were active between the flash and their response. This kind of subjective awareness was previously thought to be limited to humans and a few other mammals. Crows can recognize patterns and make inferences. In tests where crows learned to associate certain symbols or patterns with food rewards, they could then generalize this learning to new, similar patterns they'd never seen before. This abstraction ability, learning a general rule and applying it to new situations, is considered a hallmark of higher intelligence. An interesting social behavior. Crows sometimes recruit others to help mob predators. When a crow spots a threat like a hawk or owl, it will give alarm calls that attract other crows to the area. The group then harasses the predator, often driving it away from the area. This coordinated defensive behavior requires communication and cooperation. Urban crows have shorter flight initiation distances than rural crows, meaning they let humans approach more closely before flying away. This suggests they've learned that urban humans typically aren't threats. However, as we know from the mask experiments, they can quickly update this assessment for specific threatening individuals. Finally, here's a myth worth addressing. The term murder for a group of crows comes from medieval folklore where crows were associated with death and omens. While it makes for dramatic language, crows aren't more murderous than any other predatory or scavenging bird. They're opportunistic omnivores who fill an important ecological role. After exploring the world of crows, we're left with a fundamental shift in how we understand intelligence itself. For too long, humans assumed that intelligence required a brain structured like ours, with our specific cortical layers and our particular evolutionary pathway. Crows prove this assumption wrong. With their 1.5 billion neurons packed into brains smaller than a walnut, corvids achieve cognitive feats comparable to primates with brains many times larger. They recognize faces and hold memories for years. They craft tools and teach their innovations to their offspring. They understand cause and effect. They know what they know. They plan multiple steps ahead. They communicate sophisticated information to their social networks. They play and appear to experience emotions. They adapt to new environments with remarkable flexibility. Crows remind us that intelligence is not a single pathway, but rather a destination that evolution has reached through multiple routes. Birds and mammals diverged approximately 300 million years ago, yet both lineages independently evolved sophisticated cognition. Crows achieved this with a radically different brain architecture, denser neuron packing, different connectivity patterns, smooth rather than folded surfaces, yet arrived at similar cognitive capabilities. The next time you see a crow, remember you're not just looking at a bird, you're looking at one of nature's great experiments in intelligence, a creature that can remember your face, solve problems you might struggle with, use tools with the skill of a craftsman, and navigate a social world as complex as any humans. These black-feathered birds that we often take for granted possess minds that rival our closest primate relatives. In studying crows, we learn not just about them, but about the nature of intelligence itself. We discover that a sophisticated mind doesn't require a specific biological blueprint. It requires neurons, connectivity, learning, social interaction, and the evolutionary pressure to adapt and survive. Crows have all of these in abundance, packed into a package that can fly. They've been watching us for millennia, adapting to our cities, learning our patterns, even using our infrastructure to their advantage. And all the while, they've been demonstrating that you don't need to be human, or even a primate, to possess a truly remarkable mind. That's the astonishing gift that crows offer us. A window into the many paths that intelligence can take, and a reminder that we share this planet with creatures whose mental lives are far richer and more complex than we ever imagined.